Good afternoon. My name is Sheila McKinnon. I'm lead minister here at First Metropolitan. And on behalf of our ministers emeritus, Alan and Megami Saunders, our board, and our congregation, we greet you at this time with affection and consolation. As we begin our memory event for Neal, I recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhai nations on whose traditional territories we live, we worship, and we do our work. I would also like to recognize and honor the Métis and Inuit peoples and the ancestries of the many students Neal taught and the teachers that he mentored. I'm going to keep going. For everything there is a season, a time to die and a time to be born. With the arrival of winter's dark, low sky, communities around the world look for the miracle of light as a sign of rebirth and hope. We celebrate this afternoon the promise of new life as we gather to remember Neal. On behalf of his family, I would like to thank you for attending, both those who are here in North Park this afternoon and those who are joining us by the technology of our YouTube live stream. We thank you. Let us pray. Compassionate Spirit of life, whom some of us name God, you renew our inner strength, you touch our imaginations, you lift us to find another meaning in life's circumstance. Today, Neal's family gathers the best memories, and they've been doing that for the last weeks. And we will hear as they retell the foundational stories of the family. For Neal's life has touched and affected many people as a husband and parent, as a congregational leader, as a teacher, as a musician, as a friend. Please join with me in these words on the back of our bulletin. Do not ask me to remember. Don't try to make me understand. Let me rest and know you're with me. Kiss my cheek and hold my hand. I'm confused beyond your concept. I am sad and sick and lost. All I know is that I need you to be with me at all cost. Do not lose your patience with me. Do not scold or curse or cry. I can't help the way I'm acting. Can't be different, though I try. Just remember that I need you, that the best of me is gone. Please don't fail to stand beside me. Love me till my life is done. And that beautiful reading is one that Jackie brought for us this afternoon. And so I'm going to turn over the pulpit to the family and also then Dr. Saunders for remembrances. And then I would like to just say a very special word about Louise. Louise Rose being here this afternoon marks a wonderful cycle of completion in relationship that she and Neal had over long decades as musicians and as friends. And we are glad she's here with us. Kathy and Jeff.
First of all, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate Neal's life with us, whether you're here in person at First Met or whether you're joining us through the live stream. We know that Neal touched many people in very different ways over his nearly 86 years, whether it was as an educator, as an athlete, a mentor, a family member, or a friend. We've had so many people reach out to us over the last few weeks to let us know how Neal had a positive influence on their lives, sharing their memories and letting us know how much he will be missed. For the last dozen or so years of Neal's life, we watched him slowly deteriorate as his Alzheimer's progressed. Because his decline was so slow, we spent many years watching him become a shadow of himself. However, there were still moments of joy in his life, even in his final years. Sometimes that smile of his would shine through when he saw Jackie or one of his grandkids. For the last couple of years, I'd push him in his wheelchair on Sunday mornings, and we'd go down to the ocean, weather permitting. I know he enjoyed those moments as he soaked up the sun and the ocean air, even if he wasn't able to tell me. We even made it down to Dallas Road on the final Sunday before he passed, so he was able to get a last look over the Salish Sea and the Olympic Peninsula and see the place he loved so much. Even though I could still see my dad in those final few years, especially when he smiled, when I remember him, I mostly remember the man he was before Alzheimer's took hold. That big, strong man who was the life of the party and whose face just lit up the room when he smiled. Our dad was a passionate guy. What Kathy and I would really like to do is talk a little bit about how we remember our dad by sharing some stories related to some of the many passions in his life. And we're going to do our best to try and get through it, but it's a little bit tough. Many of you will know that Neal had a lifelong love of sports, whether it was playing, coaching, or spectating. As a boy and as a young man, Neal excelled in many sports, including basketball, soccer, football, baseball, golf, and of course rugby. In fact, he went on to represent BC and Canada in rugby before retiring at the young age of 26 because of multiple concussions. Although the rugby stopped, he continued to play golf and racquetball for many years. Well, I think golf kind of drove him crazy. Racquetball is the ideal sport for him, as he used his size and his strength and his reflexes to control the middle of the court and make his opponents run. Many of his friends, I'm not sure they thought of themselves as friends at the time, spent a torturous 45 minutes chasing the ball from side to side while Neal stood in the middle and played them back and forth. So those who played sports with Neal will know he was competitive at pretty much everything he did, whether it was racquetball with his friends or whether it was Trivial Pursuit with our family. I played racquetball with Neal as a teenager lots of times, and I can't tell you the number of times when I'd be on the cusp of winning a game, only for him to come from behind, score the last 4 or 5 points, and win. He was happy to let the game be competitive, but he would not let me win unless I earned it. I have similar memories of playing basketball with him out in the driveway when I was a teenager. My dad was a good basketball player, a strong guy, and he had this crafty little running hook shot that he could make pretty consistently. We played for years, and I could never win. Finally, when I got to about the age of 15, I got a little taller than him, and I could shoot over him, and I could block that little crafty running hook shot. Once I started to beat him, though, the one-on-one games were pretty much over. When I was in my 20s, my dad mentioned to me how he felt bad because he could remember a time when he was being a little bit too rough on me playing basketball in the driveway. This was really interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One is it told me he was always holding back a bit. And two, I didn't actually remember the situation at all. I didn't remember an occasion where he was too rough with me. And this said a lot to me about my dad. While he was competitive, he was trying to make me a better athlete by teaching me to compete. But he also understood that he had to balance that competition with making sure I developed a passion for the game and always wanted to come back for more. And I think he managed to strike that balance just right.
So I was never able to be competitive with my dad in physical sports. He could cream me on every court and every field, but he was there to cheer me on, and the sports I played well into my adult life, and even if they weren't sports or events that were his own passion or his own interest. For example, in 2000, I ran the Vancouver Marathon, and he came over to cheer me on, I think making Mom and Jeff and Carrie all come along for the trip as well so that I would have my own mini fan club there. It's a pretty tedious event for those of you who have spectated a marathon. It's like 4 or 5 hours of doing nothing. So he spent a good portion in true Neal fashion chatting with everybody around him and making friends. And part of this was figuring out qualifying times for all of the major events in running. He met me at the finish line, excited to tell me how close I came to qualifying for Boston or New York. And even though distance running wasn't his passion, he would be all in if that's what I wanted to do. But it should be competitive. And I did get to directly experience Dad's competitive side in game playing, as Jeff alluded to with a Trivial Pursuit. And for me and my dad, it was mostly word games. And two of our favorites were Deluxe Boggle and Perquacky. I don't know if anyone's played those games as a kid. We started playing these games together when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. My dad did not take it easy on me. He happily pulled from his full adult vocabulary and pretty much won every game for quite some time. But I got better and better, and I started winning pretty consistently by the time I was about 10 years old. And I tell you that story because the lesson I learned from that was you get better by playing with the best. And it really stayed with me, and I think was a big part of my academic drive and fearlessness of just jumping into that next level and into that higher league without being afraid of it.
Neal didn't just love playing sports. He also loved coaching and encouraging others in sports. Early in his teaching career, he was heavily involved in coaching many sports, including rugby and basketball. He even coached soccer teams for Kathy and I when we were little kids playing in Revelstoke. Many of you may not know that Neal was also the president of BC School Sports in the early 70s, and he went on to be the chair of Sport BC. His passion for sports participation was evident throughout his career as a high school administrator, as he loved to come out and watch the various teams play. And Kathy and I both have memories of being taken to the Revelstoke High School gym on many a Saturday when there was a basketball or volleyball tournament on. He'd give us a couple of bucks for the concession and then pop in and out to check on us and the game while he got his work done. Kathy and I both remember these days fondly as it was really a start of our love of sport. As we got to high school ourselves, my dad was always there to watch our games and tournaments and encourage and support our passions for whatever sports we wanted to play. I even remember my dad would let me and my friends into the gym to practice basketball on weekends when he was working. If he wasn't working, sometimes he would just give me the key and the alarm code, and I let myself in. I'm sure he wasn't supposed to do that, but I don't think he could have thought of a better place for me and my friends to be spending our Saturday afternoons than shooting hoops in the gym. As we have children of our own, and they discover their own passions, I can just imagine how proud he would be of watching his grandchildren excel at their favorite sports. In particular, Jonah on the soccer field and Eden on the basketball court. It's kind of funny, Jonah arrived here today for the service straight from a soccer game, and Eden arrived here to the service straight from a basketball game. I think Neal would really appreciate that.
Most of you will also know that Neal had a lifelong passion for music, which of course he shared with Mom and probably many of you out here. He was an incredible pianist, even at a young age, who could churn out almost anything by ear. And one of my earliest memories is Dad playing Sunrise Sunset from Fiddler on the Roof for me and Jeff. I'll always have a fondness for shares, gypsies, tramps, and thieves, which was apparently a big favorite of his in the early 70s. Played, of course, through the eyesore of the world's biggest speakers, which were, of course, necessary to true enjoyment of that sound for those of us who visited our home in the early 70s. Almost any party our parents hosted at some point found Dad sitting down for his piano bar set, and for that matter, any party he attended where there was a decent piano to play. Old favorites like Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head always featured. Dad had a real love for opera and musicals, and especially Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals and similar big productions. And I shared this love with him. I remember that four of us took a big family trip to New York when I was about 14 years old, and we went to see Cats on Broadway. I think that was a major highlight of the trip for him, and it certainly was for me. We came back with the piano music for the show, and a lot of Cats was heard in our household for the next several years, possibly several decades. Dad shared his joy of music with others well into his 70s. Following our parents' move to Victoria, he was a weekly feature on the piano in the Oak Room at the Broadmead Lodge for veterans. And I attended a few of his performances and was really proud to see the joy he brought to the residents there with the true golden oldies set. And while Alzheimer's took away Dad's ability to enjoy many experiences,
like Kathy was saying, while Alzheimer's took away our dad's ability to enjoy many experiences with his grandchildren, he was able to share in the musical interests of all five. And I know he loved the concerts and performances that they brought to the James Bay Care Center, usually shared by other residents, over the last 5+ years. Rose on her violin, Jonah on his viola, Eden on the piano, Kaya fiddling and singing, and of course Callum singing, always singing. Another one of Neal's greatest passions was travel. Man, did he ever love to travel. After he retired, if Neal and Jackie weren't on a trip, Neal was in the process of planning a trip. They became owners at Pacific Shores in Parksville, and Neal served as president of the Owners Association for over 20 years. He loved the additional opportunities this afforded his travel, and he loved the friendships that he forged there. I think some of his friends from there are here tonight, or today. Neal and Jackie traveled to Europe many times, including to visit Carrie and I when we were living in England, and to visit Kathy in Germany when she was on a foreign exchange there. They traveled extensively throughout the US, from Hawaii to Alaska to Florida to New York to California. Of course, they saw a lot of Canada, spending time in Quebec and Ontario and Newfoundland and the other maritime provinces. They cruised down the Volga River in Russia, and they cruised the Rhine in Germany. They also cruised around the Mediterranean and through the Panama Canal. And they traveled to Australia and New Zealand, Egypt and Morocco, Costa Rica and Cuba. And of course, Neal and Jackie traveled to Puerto Vallarta every winter for more than a decade to spend 4 weeks with their great friends at Velas Vallarta. That was a particular joy of theirs. So clearly, Neal took every opportunity to travel. And I think this may have started with a trip to Japan when he was representing Canada on a rugby tour in the late 1950s. My favorite story of how badly my dad had the travel bug comes to me from my mom. He and a fellow teacher organized a 2-week tour of Europe to take a bunch of students away over a summer. When did he take this trip? During the summer of 1969, the same year my sister was born, about 4 months later. And then he followed that up by doing it again the next summer when my mom had a 1-year-old and was pregnant with me. Neal definitely had a passion for travel, something that is passed on to his oldest grandchild, Kaya, who's already been to New Zealand and to Europe and to Mexico and a whole bunch of US states. And I know she can't wait to get out and see more of the world and follow in her grandfather's footsteps.
As you all know, Neal was a teacher and then a school principal for over 20 years. Both Jeff and I attended high school where he was principal, so we had more of a close-up view than most kids of their parents' work setting. You know, when I reflect back on what Dad was like as a teacher and principal, mentor is the word that comes to mind and that others have shared with us. He was incredibly invested in his own staff. Some of us shared with us over the years how important he was to their careers and shaping their own journeys, and I think he took a lot of pride in that. This was also true of his students. He was super invested in the kids in his schools, and he just delighted in following their trajectories after they graduated. Continued to do what he could to support them. It thrilled him to watch kids find and pursue their passion, and while he loved seeing strong core academic kids find academic success, I think he was equally proud of the automotive shop at the school, which regularly serviced our family cars, and was thrilled to see kids take off into art and performing arts careers and all manner of other occupations. It just thrilled him that kids would find their way and pursue their passion. In our early teen years, Jeff and I were hired by Dad for really weird, odd jobs around his high school during the summer. Things like cleaning out lockers and closets and packing up and unpacking books and paperwork, and I think I even did some student timetabling, apologies to those who experienced errors. While this probably had the aim of keeping us occupied and out of trouble and out of our mom's hair, in retrospect, I think it was also Dad's way of including us in the work about which he was so passionate. You know, he loved being a principal. He just loved being a principal. You know, I think Jeff and I have reflected on how, especially in the later years, he'd stand in the hall and just really enjoy watching the kids and enjoy saying hi and just, how are you? And just really loved it. And because of that, he worked a lot. Early mornings to school, meetings in the evening, lots of paperwork at home, and even during vacations. And I think this was his way of giving us an opportunity to be a closer part of that world. We'd be remiss if we failed to mention Neal's involvement in the Rotary Club. My dad loved Rotary, loved being a Rotarian. Rotary was, in many ways, the perfect organization for my dad, as it brought together his love of service, mentorship, youth advocacy, and socializing and friendships. And he could pair it with travel, another one of his loves. He rarely, if ever, missed a meeting, went home, and he made up meetings while away at other clubs. There's this thing, for those of you who are not involved in Rotary, where you can always go. If you're a Rotarian, you can just go in the city you find yourself and just join the meeting. Dad would seek these out. We'd literally be on vacation somewhere, thinking about what we were going to do with his day, and he's like, oh, I think there's a meeting today, see ya. And he'd be off for a couple of hours. I know this happened, I can remember clearly California, Texas, Pennsylvania, and he just thought this was the best thing. It was he would be off to make new friends and invite others to come visit us back home. It really helped him fulfill that, social side. Dad was a big part of initiating the exchange student program with the Parksville Club, Rotary Club, and I had the opportunity to spend a year in Germany through that program. He so enjoyed coming to Germany and meeting all my host families and other Rotarians, and he equally enjoyed the many students he and my mom hosted in Parksville. And those students and their families became and continued to be lifelong friends of our families, and we're still very connected to them.
We've shared some of Neal's great passions, but by no means was he limited to just those things. There were some smaller things as well, and bigger things. Neal had a sweet tooth and a particular love of ice cream. Whether it was stopping at the Dutchman Dairy outside Salmon Arm for an ice cream cone when we lived in Revelstoke, or his nightly bowl of ice cream after he retired, he really loved ice cream. Something that he seems to have passed on to all of his grandchildren, by the way. His love of ice cream also showed up in some of his other activities. He was quick to be a Rotary volunteer to sell ice cream on the beach during Sandcastle days in Parksville. I think he had easy access to the product that way. When the high school in Parksville had their weekly Dairy Queen Dilly Bar and Buster Bar sales, didn't matter what kind of meeting Dad was in, he was the first in line to support the fundraising. Before he moved into the James Bay Care Center, Alzheimer's really let his sweet tooth take over. One of my daughter Eden's funniest memories is walking into Jackie and Neal's place to find her grandpa happily sitting in front of the TV with a giant bowl of about 8 to 10 scoops of ice cream in it. That was the point where Jackie decided that there could no longer be ice cream in the freezer and the cookies had to be hidden. We thought it would have been really great to serve ice cream here at the service, but we thought it's probably a little bit messy and maybe not great in this time. But we do have some special Purdy's chocolates that a couple of the grandkids are going to hand out after the service. So please take it home, enjoy it, and think about Neal and his sweet tooth.
Many of the stories we've already told touch on this, but I think it's worth repeating that one of Neal's great loves was spending time around people, socializing. There was a reason he was involved, I think, in so many organizations. He was energized by meeting new people and was always making new friends. Jeff was just remarking the other day that he cannot count the number of times he sat in a hot tub on a holiday with Dad while my dad struck up a 20-minute conversation with other guy in hot tub, often travel-related, and they went on to become great friends. As a social person, Neal loved a good party, whether it was getting together with family and friends to celebrate important events or hosting dinner parties. He was usually the life of the party. Neal especially loved being the bartender. Some of you may recall, he always took on that role, whether it was on the annual fishing trips with Mike and Bill and Scott, or hosting dinner parties. You could always count on him to make sure you had a drink in your hand. Which leads me to another of his loves, wine. Dad loved going down to the U-Brew to make wine almost as much as he loved drinking it and sharing it with family and friends. The jury is still out on how drinkable that wine is, but here we are.
So we've shared a lot of Neal's passions and loves with you, and many of you will remember those things. But the one thing that Neal loved more than anything else over the course of his life was his wife, Jackie. Neal and Jackie were married in 1965 and celebrated their 56th anniversary this year. Jackie stood by Neal's side for those 56 years, encouraging and supporting him in his professional life, and caring for and loving him right up to the end. Many people have often remarked to both of us what an amazing caregiver our mom is. And Neal knew it, and he loved her for it. Even as my dad moved into long-term care and his condition deteriorated as the Alzheimer's took a greater hold, as soon as Jackie walked into the room, his face would light up with that great big Neal smile. Neal had a real passion for life and loved many things, but Jackie was the thing that Neal loved the most.
Thank you, Jeff and Kathy, for those wonderful memories of your dad. My name's Alan Saunders. I was part of the ministry team here when Neal and Jackie decided to make First Met their church home. Deep peace to each one of you. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the starry night to you. Deep peace of the source of all peace to you. I never saw Neal Henderson play rugby. But I did get to see the determination, the sense of fair play, and the sense of teamwork with which he exhibited as he played that sport. And I saw it right here at this church when he took on a formidable task. 2 historic congregations had just amalgamated, and there still was a ton of work to do in sorting things out. Tension ran high. People were worried. What are we going to do next? Where do we go from here? And where in the world will we ever find someone who will lead and chair our church council? And to this day, I can still remember one of our members coming in and virtually floating into the building for joy because she was saying, guess what? I think we have someone ready to do that. Because this was when Neal Henderson put his faith into action and stepped forward to take on that task. And that determination, that sense of fair play, the sense of good, solid teamwork served both him and this congregation so well. He said, well, I don't know very much about either of the 2 amalgamating congregations, but I do know how to chair a meeting. And that he did. He did such a fine job, and we were all the better for it. And while I never saw Neal play rugby, I indeed did hear stories about that trip to Japan when he was selected for that honor. And what an honor it was. What a thrill it must have been. And all through his life, his love of sports brought with it lessons to be learned. And he brought those lessons forward in his life here in this church. So I never saw Neal play rugby, and I must confess, I never heard him play the piano in the Oak Room at Broadmead Lodge. However, I still remember the day I discovered that he had that talent. Both of us had been at yet another church meeting, and afterwards I went back to my office thinking that Neal and the others all had gone home. But a moment later, down the hallway and round the corner, there came this gorgeous music, smooth as honey, these jazz renditions of popular songs. And by the time I got to the Doreen McLeod room and saw Neal there at the piano, he was just totally absorbed in that music that he was playing. You could see how it was speaking to something very deep within him. How wonderful that Neal and Jackie shared that love of music, had that love of music in common. And how wonderful that he shared his gift with those people at Broadmead Lodge all those many times. I never got to know Neal during his years and his career as an educator. But I'm convinced that he must have been one of the finest people to have that occupation, because we all know that a good teacher also is a very enthusiastic learner. And well past his retirement, he continued to have a great enthusiasm for both teaching and learning. And it served him well. It served us well. Of course, we know it wasn't just music that he and Jackie had in common. And I saw when he took on his responsibilities here in this congregation, I knew that he had her solid support each step of the way. And we've just heard a tribute from her own family about how that solid support continued throughout this long time of losing health. Friends, my own mother suffered a very similar illness, one that lasted a similar length of time. And to Jackie, and to Jeff and Carrie, to Kathy and Adam and the family, my hope is that you will experience something similar We each have our own experiences, but I hope your experience will be something similar to what I and my family experienced. We discovered that after all that time, we had done just about all our grieving already. And instead, we discovered this precious gift. Because now memories could come back from days and years before. And so my hope for each one of you is that you can go back over those memories, and that in remembering that young rugby player, that dedicated educator, that active leader in the community and in the church, and especially that unforgettable member of your family. I hope that in some sense you find Neal is restored to you, as I found my own mother was restored to me. That is my hope and my prayer for each one of you. And for all of us, as we see again the twinkle in his eye and that engaging smile of his and that positive can-do spirit that we knew in Neal Henderson. May that gift be there for us all. And for the grandchildren, for Kaya, Eden, and Rose, for Jonah and Callum, already you have been hearing such marvelous stories, and I hope that you will continue to hear such stories that let you know what a wonderful grandpa is yours. He can still teach us many things as we journey. And finally, may each member of the family know that there are others both here and joining through the live stream, people who remember Neal fondly and with much appreciation, and that there are a number of us who still recall a time when a congregation was desperate for someone to step forward and show some great leadership at a challenging moment. We remember, and we give thanks. Surely the Creator was at work when Neal stepped forward that day. And Neal did such a fine job. With determination and grace, he left this church such a better congregation. And for that, today I say, thank you, Neal. Journey well. And thank you, Creator, for this gift. Amen.
You'll hear that Dr. Bonnie Henry is phoning to remind us that although we'll stand together and you will be singing just behind our masks in a very soft voice this beautiful hymn, We Are Pilgrims on a Journey. Please stand.
Here to help each other.
The well-known line, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven," is the opening line of a sacred poem found in the book Ecclesiastes. And in that sharing of life's wisdom and reflections, we hear the different chapters and experiences, such as the family and Alan detail, all the rich experiences that were part of Neal's life. Of course, I did not know him then. But I did feel it synergistic that on the day I was leaving James Bay Center, Community Care Center, the young man who took me up to Neal's room had played basketball in this church and said very enthusiastically, "If ever you open that league again, you let me know." I just knew he took one look at me and thought, that woman plays basketball. But in this sacred list from Ecclesiastes, it's not a list of everything that we want. It's not a list of every experience we covet for each other. But it is from that ancient pen, a list of experiences that often we are given by life. And so it becomes sacred because it is our shared experience, and because we know that we live it in the company of those we travel with and in the sight of God. I'm not going to read the whole poem to you, but I'd like to just share a few of them, and I'd like to pause and invite you to place your own memories of your life with Neal and his family and his places of absolute influence still as we hear some of these things. We think it was written by a man named Koleath. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pick that which has been planted. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And can we add a time to play music and a time to listen deeply? A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time for war and a time for peace. All these many seasons in Neal's long life, each one of them like a pebble thrown into a pond, rippling. The losses of Alzheimer's doesn't stop his legacy. The ripple of his impact continues to roll up on shores and beaches far from here. And we will not be told when one of those waves hits the sand. But in faith we know it will. All of these seasons are necessary in our lives, although not always welcome. But as we walk together this path, our hearts are opened in knowledge and in compassion. As we come today and hear these stories, we laugh as we heard from the family, with a lump in our throat. We remember with the mist in our eye. We give thanks that for Neal, this part of his journey has ended. We are grateful for the friends who stood by, the family who loved, and caregivers who reached out. But we do not believe the story ends here. Our faith informs us that more continues beyond our imagining. And although we do not agree on what it looks like, we will discover one final mysterious surprise. And so we can gather and still smile and laugh because we trust that Neal's spirit continues on in a place of God's light and love. We gather today in the light of our Christ candle, one small little flame holding the light of our lives and the hope of our souls. Thanks be to God.
On behalf of my family and myself, I thank you for joining us this afternoon. So many memories, and each and every one of you have been part of those, are part of those, and will always be part of those. Neal, early in the 2004, wrote extensively about his life. So if you're trying to figure out how come we knew all this, he did write it. And I'm so grateful for him for having written that. Also, when Neal got the diagnosis of the Alzheimer's, he was devastated. He was shocked. He wrote that. I'm shocked. Can't believe this. But he also knew that something was going on because his confidence in his spelling, his confidence in his arithmetic, his confidence of finding those words, his confidence, he was losing his confidence. And for someone who had been so confident most of his life, it was scary, very scary for him. So he made a pledge that he would help me in any way that I chose to help him. And for that, I'm truly grateful. When the first thing was we had to learn about the disease. So off to the Alzheimer's Society we went, and they were wonderful. Gave us lots of material to read, and Neal read it all. On top of that, one day I was going through I came across an article, and I think it was in the Oak Bay News, about a new group called Arts and Alzheimer's. And if it just had a telephone number, and if you were at all interested, give them a phone call. So I did. And I talked with Marjorie Moulton. And she said, this 2-hour group will meet every week, and we'll do art projects, and we will do music, sing songs. And so when I thought, well, works for me. We'll see if it works for Neal. So when I suggested this, he liked the music part, but he was a little bit wary about this art stuff. That was one area that he felt inadequate. Anyway, we went for the first session, and we met Marjorie, and we met 2 leaders for the art projects, and then there was men and women. Oh, all of them new faces to us. But the friendship that grew from this group were amazing. And of course, we got introduced to Louise, because Louise led the music for the hour. Neal had already met Louise many years before in Revelstoke, when she slid in, as she says, in her Volkswagen to do a concert in the middle of the winter. So they had struck a friendship then, and off and on through the years, we had the opportunity to pick up where we'd left off. Anyway, those Arts and Alzheimer's sessions were a lifesaver for us, because we made a new circle of friends who were experiencing what we were experiencing. And everyone in that group was a little different place in the journey. And that was really helpful. So the music, of course, we had such wonderful sing-alongs. And Neal found that if he came early, before 10 o'clock, that he could sit at the piano and entertain the newcomers. And he made, some amazing friendships with others who played piano too. That group of support has seen me through, and my family, for, what would it be, 12, 13 years of this journey. And I also have had the joy of being part of a support group here at First Met. But those people didn't quite know Neal the same as those who were part of the Arts and Alzheimer's group. And so we have journeyed together all these years. They have taught me how to be a caregiver with someone with dementia. So I want to share with you what is called the Caregiver's Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the tender, open-hearted love needed on the caregiving journey, the strength of body, serenity of mind, clarity of purpose, and the willingness of spirit to meet the extraordinary, everyday, constant changes and challenges of caregiving with a smile and good cheer. And please grant me the compassion and the courage to choose the right path through the myriad decisions, making the very best choices for the highest good of my loved one, my family, and myself. Allow me to know that I am enough. I do enough. And by giving up myself at the deepest level, soul level that is, caring with diligence for my own health and well-being, also as a priority, I will experience the beautiful rewards intrinsic to caring for another. Let me seek, find, and accept help and loving support from family, friends, community, and professionals for the journey of caring. Let my loved one receive the gift of love from my heart and hands with gratitude and healing according to your will. Amen. And now I'd like to introduce you to my granddaughter, Rose Spivak, who will play, along with Louise's accompaniment, You Raise Me Up. And while Rose is getting planted, let me remind you the words to this song. When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raised me up so I can stand on mountains. You raised me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raised me up to more than I can be.
Thank you so much for that solo. I almost feel like some angels were cheering along. We've come to the end of this part of our service. I would remind you to stay for the chocolates. As we turn back into these shortening days and lengthening nights, I would ask you to join with me in sending a prayer in whatever way is comfortable for you to pray to every researcher, every scientist, every social scientist, every caregivers group, every ward, every memory care institution, working together to fight what we don't know about the diseases we call Alzheimer's, to provide comfort to people in the family and respite to those who serve, but most of all, to the future generations, to add more tools in the tool belt of those who have to face people like Neal Henderson and say, there has been a diagnosis made. We pray for that day when they can finish that conversation by saying, but we have new tools and there is new hope. In so many places, medicine has made that possible through a multidisciplinary approach. We pray, oh, we pray for that to come to the Alzheimer's family. And so, Neal, our time here is ended. And into the freedom of the wind and the sunshine, into the loving hearts of those who knew you, those who loved you, and those who are learning about you this day. Into the wind's breath and into the hands of the Star Maker, we let you go. O Lord, support us all by your grace through all the hours of life's day until the shadows lengthen, the busy world is hushed, the fever of life is over, and the evening comes. And then, Holy One, in your mercy, grant us a safe lodging, a holy rest, and peace at the last. Amen.